She was insulted every day just because of her growing belly, mocked for being pregnant with no husband. Girls like her shouldn't be allowed near a wedding bouquet, coworkers whispered as neighbors sneered and taped notes to her door. Don't let her live here. She's a stain on the whole building. She had no idea. The man from that one unforgettable night was a billionaire, and he was tearing apart the entire city just to find her. In the small back room of Bloom and Grace, a modest flower shop on the outskirts of downtown, Emily Grant stood at a rough wooden table, carefully trimming the stems of freshly delivered roses. The air smelled of damp soil and bitter fertilizer, an aroma she usually found soothing. Lately, however, every inhale felt heavy with tension. She was wearing her everyday clothes, an old sweater stretched slightly around her growing belly, soft pants that clung to thighs fuller than before, and plain flat shoes that had seen better days. Her boss, Mrs. Smith, bustled in and out, ignoring her existence except to deliver biting remarks. Emily's quiet nature, once tolerated, now drew open scorn once her body started to show. "What are you doing dawdling there?" Mrs. Smith snapped, motioning at a bucket of wedding bouquets. "We've got a bride picking up in an hour, and you look like you're daydreaming about some cheap TV drama. Focus unless you want to be replaced by someone who can handle more than a pair of scissors." Emily tried to murmur an apology, but the words snagged in her throat. She turned back to her work, forcing calm into each slice of the shears. She could recall a time before the pregnancy when the same boss would politely greet her with a tepid smile. Now it seemed Emily's belly had shifted the entire world's perspective. Perhaps they saw her as a scandal personified, a reminder that she was alone, carrying a child no one recognized. She stifled a sigh, blinking down at the white daisies, wishing her hands didn't tremble so visibly. She finished trimming the roses, then moved on to bind them with ribbons and a sweet-scented filler. Customers came and went, each glancing at her belly with open curiosity. Some exchanged a snicker with Mrs. Smith as if in on the same cruel joke. Others avoided her altogether, perhaps not wanting to be associated with an unwed mother. Emily had been prepared in some sense for judgment. She'd grown up watching how quickly neighbors could spread rumors about any woman they deemed fallen. She remembered her mother, quiet and gentle, who wore second-hand clothes and endured pointed remarks about that family's supposed lack of class. She'd always told Emily to keep her head high, though her own shoulders were perpetually hunched from the weight of scorn, and so Emily tried to mirror that silent dignity, even as her heart ached from each new barb. Midway through her shift, a coworker, Marlene, brushed past her with an armful of hydrangeas. Under her breath, Marlene muttered, "You sure you want to be around all these wedding flowers? Doesn't it hurt? You know, given your situation." It was the kind of comment that pretended to be sympathetic, but held a stabbing cruelty beneath it. Emily made no retort, only paused to inhale and exhale slowly before resuming her arrangement of lilies. She reminded herself that any confrontation might cost her the job she needed so desperately, with only a few weeks' rent left before eviction loomed. She had no husband or partner to fall back on, just a child growing day by day inside her, reminding her that time was short and money scarcer than ever. By closing time, the tension in the shop had crystallized into near hostility. Mrs. Smith approached while Emily was sweeping up leaves and petals. "I don't want to see you here tomorrow," she said in a tone that pretended to be kind but dripped with malice. "We'll need your station for one of the new hires, someone who can handle the heavier loads. Well, I'm afraid your condition makes you less, flexible. Let's just call it a mutual parting." Emily's broom stilled mid-sweep. She looked at the older woman, trying to see if there was any trace of warmth left, but Mrs. Smith's eyes were as cold as the shop's walk-in fridge. A flick of pity registered, or perhaps a sense of triumph in dismissing an imperfect employee. Emily bowed her head slightly. "Yes, ma'am," was all she managed. She finished sweeping in silence, ignoring the throbbing in her temples. This job had paid so little that she'd struggled to keep the lights on, but it was something, a shred of stability. Now it was gone. She left Bloom and Grace without a parting word to anyone. Outside, the city's noise blared, passing cars, honking horns, the swirl of pedestrians crossing busy streets. She kept her eyes forward, tucking her hands into her coat's pockets, one of which hid that single item she cherished above all else, a monogrammed handkerchief embroidered with a simple L. The letter was elegantly stitched in gold thread. She traced the embroidered surface with her thumb as she walked, recalling the night it came into her possession. That memory sent a flutter of conflicting emotions through her: longing, regret, wonder, heartbreak. She had tried to bury that memory these past months, focusing only on survival, but it refused to die, especially now as her belly swelled with the proof of that night's lasting consequence. She headed back to her tiny rented room in a worn-down building that reeked of cigarette smoke and leaking pipes. The building manager glared at her in the hallway as though her pregnancy were a personal affront. On the steps, two neighbors snickered. Heard she got fired. One said to the other, letting the words echo so she'd overhear. She brushed past them, unlocking her door. A piece of paper fluttered from under her feet. Another note, no doubt. She picked it up, reading the scrawled message: "We don't want single mothers messing up the place. Leave, or we'll petition the owner." Her hands shook with anger, but she quietly folded the paper, tucking it next to the handkerchief in her pocket. She closed the door behind her, sank onto the single chair by the small window. The late afternoon light cast shadows on the peeling wallpaper, making everything feel sharper, more isolating. Her stomach gave a faint kick, her child's movement. She pressed a hand there, comforted by the life stirring inside, even as tears threatened to spill. She remembered how for weeks her co-workers had whispered that she was a disgrace to wedding traditions, that a woman with no ring and a belly had no right to handle bridal bouquets. The memory of each cruel line haunted her, but overshadowing it all was the recollection of a single night from nearly a year ago, a night of pouring rain. She'd been stranded after a friend's birthday, no taxis in sight, her phone dead. Desperate to find warmth, she stumbled into a near-empty jazz bar. The musician on stage plucked a slow, moody tune. She took a seat at the bar, shivering water dripping from her jacket. And that was when she noticed him, Lucas. He wore a tailored suit, but seemed oddly unpolished tie, loosened hair slightly disheveled as though life had battered him with storms of its own. She didn't ask why he sat alone, swirling whiskey in a glass. She only knew that when he glanced her way, something in his eyes made her heart clench, an old sorrow mirrored in them. They ended up talking with surprising ease, skipping the typical introductions. She never asked for his surname. He never asked for hers. They spoke of regrets, of intangible hopes, of how fleeting happiness could be. The hours slipped by in a haze of conversation that felt uncharted raw. The jazz band played background to the confessions they whispered. He smelled faintly of orchids, she remembered, which she found peculiar yet alluring. Who wore such a fragrance? Then the bar closed, but their talk continued under the dripping awning outside, the rain drenching them. Some unspoken gravitational pull led them to a nearby motel, neither quite admitting they were crossing a line. The night was a blur of closeness. Emily recalled the gentleness of his touch, the tremor in his voice when he said, "I lost everything once. Now I want to hold on to something real." She drifted asleep in his arms to the lullaby of the rain against the window. At dawn, she awoke alone. He had left a single note scrawled on motel stationery. "If you ever need to find me, just remember the orchid scent. Fate will lead us both back." Beside it, he'd left his monogrammed handkerchief marked with an elegant L. She had clutched it, confused, yet strangely comforted. She told herself maybe they'd meet again. But as weeks passed, then months, and a pregnancy test turned positive, she realized she had no real way to locate him. The bar employees had no idea who he was. She assumed with a pang that it had been a fleeting dream. She intended to raise the child alone, muster whatever strength she had. Now, almost 8 months along, she sat in her cramped room, the pastel gloom of evening settling. The city outside glimmered with distant neon. She closed her eyes, remembering the texture of that night, the hush of the jazz, the warmth of his gaze. She exhaled slowly, pressing the folded note of eviction threats to her chest. Life had narrowed into a corner. She wondered vaguely who he was. She had never guessed he might be wealthy or powerful. His clothes looked nice, but she'd been too wrapped up in the conversation to assume anything about his status. She pictured him as just a lonely soul like herself. That same daydream flickered again. If only she could find him, tell him about their child. She shook her head at her own fantasy. The reality was her immediate problem. She had no job, no stable roof soon, and a baby on the way. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, unbeknownst to her, Lucas King was indeed searching. He stood in the top-floor office of a vast skyscraper, CEO of a global fragrance empire, exhausted from months of restlessness. He had sniffed at sample after sample, tested countless new scents. None captured the essence he'd tasted that rainy night in the bar, a blend of orchid rain and the faint musk of something intangible. His staff found him odd in his obsession, but he insisted that memory haunted him. He told no one the real reason. They guessed it was some ephemeral fragrance he encountered. They didn't know it was the memory of a woman he'd let slip away the single night that jolted him from grief. He felt every passing moment as a betrayal of that memory, so he poured fortunes into research. He hired scent trackers, gave them the directive to find anything matching the floral note. They roamed hospitals, boutiques, anywhere that might register an unusual orchid-like profile. They came up empty. Lucas's frustration mounted. He scrolled through digitized city records trying to find a clue about a woman named Emily. He didn't even know her last name. Or did she mention it? He half remembered a fleeting mention of her friend's name, some references to a father who was gone. He found no leads. He began to think he'd invented half that night. Then a stroke of luck, a second-hand shop known for random antiques turned up a used blanket that smelled faintly of orchid and something else. The shop's owner said it came from a building near the flower district. Lucas latched on to that single thread. A swirl of phone calls, bribes, subtle questions. Then he discovered a note from a laundry service that recognized the embroidered L on a handkerchief. The puzzle pieces began to align each day, bringing him closer to a rumored pregnant woman who once left a hint of an orchid fragrance. He could hardly believe it. A child might be out there. The thought electrified him. He dispatched staff to quietly roam neighborhoods, scanning for a pregnant woman named Emily. That was how, unbeknownst to Emily, his search tightened around her small corner of the city. On the day she lost her job that same evening, Lucas's informant pinned down an address, some rundown building where the laundry ticket trace ended. He personally drove out in a low-profile black car, ignoring his advisors, who insisted he keep a public distance. He stepped out onto a cracked sidewalk, the building looming gray and grim. He could sense the hush of poverty, the hostility of neighbors scowling at strangers. His heart hammered with the possibility that she might be there behind one of those grimy windows. The informant pointed to a specific apartment on the second floor. Lucas ascended the musty staircase, ignoring the stairs. On the landing, he saw scribbles of graffiti notes pinned. Something about, "Get her out." He felt a jolt of rage that people could turn on a pregnant woman like that. He reached her door, heart pounding. He smelled a faint trace like lilies or jasmine or orchid. He wasn't sure if it was memory or actual fragrance. His hand shook as he rapped on the door. A hush. Then footsteps inside. The door opened a crack, revealing Emily's tear-stained face and the arc of her belly beneath a loose sweater. Their eyes locked, stunned recognition flooding in. She stared at him, too overwhelmed to speak. Her mind reeled the man from that night, the man who left the embroidered handkerchief. He was here in front of her, dressed in a sleek business coat, an air of authority emanating from him. She parted her lips, but no words came. He swallowed, then quietly said, "You thought I wouldn't find you. You thought I wouldn't recognize the woman who smelled like rain orchids. In the future, I thought I'd lost Emily's heart hammered." In that second, the months of loneliness, scorn, hopelessness all surfaced in a wave. She burst into tears, turning her face away as if ashamed of her shabby surroundings. Lucas stepped forward gently, letting the door open. He noticed the disarray in the apartment, the chipped walls, the single lamp flickering. He saw the traces of cruelty, a note on the table reading "Leave." He read the exhaustion on Emily's features, the quiet heartbreak in her posture. Carefully, he set down the small bouquet of white orchids he'd brought with him. "Emily," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for leaving that night. I didn't know how to ask for more. And I had no way to find you, no name. But I never stopped searching." She sank onto a worn couch, hugging herself. The baby kicked, a slight movement that Lucas noticed in the shift of her belly. His eyes widened. It was real. He kneeled by her side, ignoring his fine coat on the dusty floor. "This child is mine," he asked gently, though he already felt certain. She nodded through tears, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. She tried to speak, but only managed a few words. "I tried. I couldn't." The swirl of frustration and relief poured out. He wrapped his arms around her shoulders in a tentative embrace, letting her sob quietly. Outside the corridor, neighbors eavesdropping froze at the sight. Here was a man who reeked of power and wealth, holding the woman they had condemned. The hush in that building's hallway became palpable. Over the next few minutes, Lucas calmed her enough to gather her few belongings. He insisted they leave. She tried to protest her rent wasn't fully paid. She had no prospects, but he was adamant. "You're not staying in a place that treats you like trash," he said, subdued anger simmering. She nodded numbly, tears drying on her cheeks. She stuffed the note from her landlord, the eviction threat, into her bag. She took one last glance around her miserable room, then followed him down the stairs. The crowd parted in the hallway, stunned at the sight. A hush followed them out onto the street where a black car waited. He helped her inside, mindful of her belly, ignoring the stares of passers-by. As the car pulled away, Emily sank into the leather seat, still reeling. Her life had just flipped in an instant. She gripped the seat belt, glancing at Lucas, who watched her with guarded concern. "I won't pressure you," he said softly. "But let me help. Let me give you what you need. You and the baby." She nodded, uncertain how else to respond. The relief that she would no longer be alone overshadowed her reservations. The city lights slid by in neon streaks as they drove. She closed her eyes, letting exhaustion tug at her. He brought her to a penthouse suite in one of the city's most exclusive high-rises. She felt out of place stepping into the private elevator that soared to the top floor. Marble floors, silent staff who bowed slightly. Her worn-out sneakers squeaked, echoing like a reminder of where she came from. In the suite, everything glowed with subtle elegance. Soft lamps, tasteful artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic night skyline. She sank onto a couch that was probably worth more than her entire year's salary, her mind whirling. Lucas dismissed the staff, telling them softly he'd handle everything. He knelt in front of her again, eyeing the gentle curve of her belly. "How many months?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. "Almost 8, she whispered. He exhaled slowly. "It's mine," he repeated, more statement than question. She nodded. He closed his eyes in relief, tears brimming. "I never forgot you," he confessed. "That night, I was broken. You gave me hope, but I woke up early, had to make a flight out of the country for a crisis in my company. I left you my handkerchief thinking we might find each other again, but—" She pressed a hand gently to his, telling him with her eyes that the blame wasn't one-sided. She hadn't exactly tried to track him either, not beyond that bar. She'd believed him just an ordinary man, not the billionaire founder of a global fragrance empire. Over the following days, she adapted in slow steps to her new environment. Lucas insisted on taking her to a doctor he trusted. The child was healthy, the doctor said, but Emily needed rest and better nutrition. Lucas's staff discreetly delivered fresh clothes, prenatal vitamins. He hovered protectively, though mindful not to crowd her. The shock of discovering he was no mere successful man but a multi-billionaire left her speechless. She watched him pace the penthouse phone in the evenings, giving orders, shifting large sums to philanthropic endeavors, all while occasionally glancing at her with tenderness. She recognized the faint orchid scent around him, a custom fragrance from his own labs, perhaps. That memory of the bar returned anew, how he had smelled of orchids that night, a clue to the empire he represented. She kept her guard up, uncertain if she could fit into his lofty world. Yet she also felt a warmth in how he treated her, a sincerity that belied the power he wielded. When news spread within his empire that he had found someone, the rumor mill ignited. But Lucas was adept at managing public relations. Before any official announcements, he simply introduced Emily quietly to key staff, stating that she was under his protection. The staff responded with bowing deference, though Emily spotted curiosity in their eyes. She overheard hushes in the corridor. He found her, the mother of his child. Some expressed relief, as if Lucas had been haunted by a lost figure for too long. She gleaned that after the death of a close relative, he'd retreated into sorrow. Meeting Emily had somehow given him life again, which was why that memory of her was so crucial. She found the story overwhelming, but she realized it paralleled her own sense of isolation. Perhaps they were two broken souls who'd met at a bar under the cloak of a rainy night. Meanwhile, word of Emily's presence leaked in narrower circles, reaching certain gossips who had once mocked her. She braced for the repercussions of them learning that the poor pregnant nobody was now connected to an influential billionaire. Indeed, phone calls from her old landlord swiftly arrived, apologizing, begging her to come back if she wished, offering a better lease. Her ex-co-workers from the flower shop bombarded her with messages. Even Mrs. Smith tried to call, stammering about reconsidering the layoff. Emily let those calls go unanswered. She had no desire to rehash the cruelty. She found more solace in forging a new path, though she was unsure what that path entailed. Lucas, sensing her turmoil, asked gently if she wanted to remain hidden or step forward publicly. The child's due date was approaching. She recognized that eventually people would see her by his side. She told him softly that she didn't want fanfare, but she also wouldn't hide anymore. She had endured enough shame for a lifetime. So in a swirl of carefully orchestrated events, Lucas introduced Emily as his partner, the future mother of his heir, at a philanthropic gala he hosted. The shimmering crowd parted as they arrived arm in arm. She wore a simple yet elegant dress he'd provided, refusing anything too showy. The hush that fell was reminiscent of her performance on stage at the alumni fiasco, but this time the hush was tinted with curiosity, not mockery. No one in that refined crowd dared insult her openly. Lucas's presence guaranteed that. If anyone had snide remarks, they kept them behind forced smiles. She felt relief, yet also an odd emptiness, recalling how easily people changed their tune around power. She had gone from scorned outcast to adored companion in the blink of an eye. She gave polite nods and quiet greetings, letting Lucas handle the grand social gestures. At his side, she discovered a new sense of safety, but also a renewed determination not to lose herself in his shadow. The final turning point came when Lucas decided to hold a press conference announcing the creation of a new initiative, the Grant Foundation, named after Emily's surname. He insisted it be done in her honor, a tribute to single mothers, pregnant women cast aside by society, those ridiculed for mistakes or lack of status. Emily felt tears threaten when he told her. "I can't fix the cruelty you faced," he admitted, "but I can help prevent it for others." So they stood before cameras in a subdued event space, Lucas describing the foundation's goals: housing assistance, medical coverage, job training. Journalists gaped at Emily, the once unknown pregnant woman who wore a gentle smile that belied the storm she'd endured. Some recognized her face from rumors or social media pictures of her battered old apartment. Now she was poised, a quiet pillar beside Lucas. Their baby was due soon. The synergy of father, mother, and unborn child offering a message of hope to many who had no resources. The foundation's announcement ended in an uproar of applause, tears among some viewers. The aftermath was swift. People who had once mocked Emily either retreated from public eye or scrambled to revise their narratives. Her old landlord publicly apologized, offering letters of reference. Mrs. Smith from the flower shop wrote a sorrowful note referencing how she only fired Emily under business pressures. Emily, reading the note, felt a pang. She didn't hate them. She simply chose not to return to that environment. She had no more bouquets to sell for weddings that had once symbolized everything she lacked. Instead, she found purpose in shaping the new foundation's outreach, meeting quietly with mothers who'd been ostracized for conceiving out of wedlock or living in poverty. She recognized their fear, their heartbreak, because it had once been her own. And through that shared experience, she offered them empathy and tangible support. Lucas provided the finances, but she supplied the soul. As her due date approached, the headlines shifted. Billionaire Lucas King stands by, pregnant partner, secret mother, found forging philanthropic empire. The mother who overcame scorn to become a symbol of hope. Emily tried not to read them. She kept her focus on the child's health, on building a stable home for the baby, on ensuring each day ended with peace rather than drama. Lucas respected that. He gave her space, yet never wavered in his devotion, often returning from work to kneel by her side, pressing his ear to her belly, whispering a vow to always keep them safe. She felt the trust between them grow in ways she couldn't have predicted from that single night. Perhaps it was destiny, or perhaps it was just the unstoppable force of love discovered in fragments of conversation or in the memory of a warm bar that smelled like jazz and orchids. When the child was finally born, a daughter with soft, dark hair, Emily's entire being filled with gratitude. In the hospital room, Lucas cradled the baby, tears streaming down his cheeks. Emily's mother had passed some years before, but she felt her mother's presence that day. She felt her father's spirit too, remembering how he told her that life can be shaped by small acts of kindness in dark places. She stared at her infant's tiny fingers, so impossibly small, and recognized a new chapter beginning. The humiliation of the past lingered only as a cautionary memory, overshadowed by the bright present of a family united. Shortly after the baby's birth, Lucas arranged a formal introduction at a philanthropic banquet. Some of the same people who once mocked Emily from afar now stood in line to greet her, to coo over the baby, to express their well wishes. She accepted their gestures politely, never forgetting that the world is fickle, adoring success but ready to devour vulnerability. She remained gracious, wearing a simple dress in pastel, her hair pinned up to highlight her natural radiance. She introduced the baby as Lily, named after the flower she once sold ironically, or perhaps after the quiet memory of orchard fragrances that drew her and Lucas together. The entire event exuded a sense of triumph, not the flashy victory of revenge, but the gentle reassurance that dignity endures. Finally, Emily found closure with her past. She visited the old building where she once lived, carrying a small hamper of supplies for the new tenant occupying her former room. She left it quietly at the door with a note that read, "For anyone in need." She felt no urge to knock or confront her ex-neighbors. Her life was no longer tied to their judgments. She also stopped by the flower shop in passing, peeking through the window. She saw a new clerk busily trimming stems, Mrs. Smith hovering behind. Emily considered stepping in to say hello, but decided against it. They had parted ways, and she owed them nothing. Her child cooed softly from the car seat. She brushed a gentle finger along the baby's cheek, then turned away, letting the moment pass. When at last she and Lucas settled into their new routine, a spacious home, a baby's cry, philanthropic duties, each day they found a rhythm of quiet harmony. She told him everything about her struggles, each humiliation endured. He listened with sorrow and admiration. She reciprocated by hearing about his lonely empire building, how he lost faith in love until that night in the bar. Together they shaped a relationship founded on mutual respect and empathy. The orchard perfume that once haunted him now found its echo in the day-to-day presence of Emily's gentle spirit. He even teased her that the baby carried that same subtle floral note in her laughter. Their final step was a marriage ceremony done in a private garden. No reporters, no lavish spectacle. Just a few true friends, a swirl of orchard blossoms, and a vow that this union was more than a legal arrangement. It was a victory over the scorn and solitude that once bound them. Emily wore a simple white dress that embraced her post-pregnancy figure with grace. Lucas, in a suit reminiscent of the one from that bar night, but with a lighter color, took her hand under an arch of orchids. They spoke their vows softly enough that only the wind and their child could hear. The official declared them husband and wife, and they sealed it with a kiss. On that day, she glimpsed the swirling arc of her journey from a pregnant woman scorned by a florist's boss and neighbors to a beloved partner of a man who changed everything with a single vow. She said a silent farewell to all the old humiliations, letting them remain as a testament to how far she'd come. In the months that followed, the Grant Foundation expanded. Emily oversaw it with a steady hand, focusing on building shelters for single mothers, providing job training, medical care, and legal assistance for those who faced harassment or eviction. She traveled discreetly to outreach centers, her baby in tow, meeting women who saw in her story a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, the negative voices that once surrounded her had all but vanished under the weight of public praise. The media's angle shifted from scandal to redemption, branding her the quiet mother who inspired the city's biggest philanthropic endeavor. She took no vanity in that label. She understood all too well how quickly the crowd's favor could shift. She kept her gaze on the essential work day after day. And so at last came a moment of reflection months after the dust settled. She stood in the corner of a newly opened Grant Foundation Center, watching mothers and children gather for a simple celebration. Balloons lined the walls, the floor littered with soft mats and playthings. She felt a sense of profound contentment. Lucas was there too, holding Lily in his arms, watching with a smile that spoke volumes. She realized how little she needed beyond this love, this purpose. The quiet woman who once cowered from neighbors' jibes was no longer the same. Now in her eyes lived the steady courage of someone who overcame shame, found love, and used compassion to help others break free from cruelty. As she gazed at her husband, remembering the single night that brought them together, she softly recalled how improbable it all was. A chance meeting in a jazz bar, a fleeting union, a single leftover handkerchief embroidered with L. Fate had spun their paths together. And though she had endured torment along the way, it had shaped her into someone formidable, not in loudness, but in her steadfast resilience. She took Lucas's free hand, gave it a gentle squeeze. He answered with a tender grin, leaning to kiss her temple. Their child gurgled happily, as if sensing the warmth of home in that moment. She felt no regret in leaving behind the place of humiliation or the mocking co-workers. She had built a new world, one that cherished grace, empathy, and the quiet triumph of a love that overcame scorn. For the rest of her days, she vowed to remember that hush in the bar, that swirl of orchid perfume, that unstoppable bond that turned adversity into connection. And she felt a hush of gratitude that life in all its cruelty had ultimately led her here. If this story touched you like it, share it, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for stories where quiet women turn shame into grace and fate never forgets the scent of truth.